For whatever reason, there's always been a stigma around mental health in our communities. Some people say that talking about your feelings makes you weak. But you know what? It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. No matter what you're struggling with, you can call or text 988-LIFELINE to connect with a trained crisis counselor and get the resources and support you need. No judgment, no stigma, just hope. Text or call 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline day or night. 988. Hope has a new number.
Same old man.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to the new podcast presented by the female film critics of InSession Film. We are speaking, we love movies, we are women in session. I'm Kristin Battestella at Therefore Review. Zita Short of the 300 Passions podcast is here again. Thank you, Zita. And Amy Thomasson, our InSession film critic by day, drama teacher by night. School's almost out. You're at A Thomasson 11 on Twitter. We've made jokes on Twitter previously. I think we've discussed, thrown out different things over previous episodes as we've discussed some classic film. Oh my gosh, I can't even talk because I'm getting so excited. Amy's like, this is only part one. This is our magnum opus. Billy Wilder, ladies. We're fans of Billy Wilder. So we want to talk about Some Like It Hot. We're gearing up for talking about a few different Pride things, having a few guests, because, you know, we're so grateful as women here at InSession Film that we just love working for a website that is just really taking new looks at diversity and film criticism and enjoying women's voices and new voices to the film community. So we want to share that love. And also, let me jump the gun a little bit and just say, we also have merchandise. You can follow our flagship on Patreon. You can see our gentlefolk on YouTube, and they have bonus content there. They've actually done some Billy Wilder episodes there as well. And we have Women InSession merchandise to go along with some of the InSession merchandise. So that's really wonderful. I know, Amy, you're going to be wearing some hoodies at school. You're going to be representing.
Oh, I already put my order in. And everyone in my family is getting merch for various holidays.
There you go. Get your Christmas shopping done. So, Amy, you mentioned, I'm not sure if it was on the air, you showed Some Like It Hot in your classroom?
Yes.
Wow.
Haven't in a while. I did it a couple years ago, and with my accelerated class. And I also showed them Sunset Boulevard. And one thing I will say about this film is I, at the time, was not teaching in the most sophisticated, urbane, classic film loving kind of a place. Very rural, South Carolina, lower socioeconomic status. So these kids were going in blind. They didn't, maybe a couple of them might have heard of Marilyn Monroe, but that's about it. And they really, really liked it. They really thought it was very, very funny and a little risque, and it is all of the above. And I will shout out to Billy Wilder, obviously one of the greatest directors of all time. However, I feel that he does not get enough credit as a screenwriter, because I think maybe people don't realize that he co-wrote most of these screenplays. And again, we look at, Patty Chayefsky, the Coen brothers, Quentin Tarantino, Aaron Sorkin, bam, bam, bam. We think of all these people as writers, and it's like, by the way, Billy Wilder co-wrote most of these screenplays, which is just some of the greatest screenplays of all time. And so many great one-liners, so many great running gags that all of his films, especially and including Some Like It Hot, actually get funnier the more you watch them, because you start to pick up on not just the lines the main characters say, but the lines the smaller background characters say are just as funny and just as witty.
I love Some Like It Hot. It's a big question. We'll probably spend the whole episode debating. I think Some Like It Hot is Billy Wilder's seminal film. And it's not to say that it's his peak, because you have The Apartment that comes right after. But one of the things that I love about
it's insane. It's insane.
it just keeps on giving. I think if you've never seen classic movies, you can watch Some Like It Hot. I think at any age, at any walk of life, you can find something in Some Like It Hot. But Zita, I do want to back up a little bit and pay attention to some Billy Wilder early, because yes, in the 30s, he wrote lots of films and then comes out, as a big director of Double Indemnity in 1944, which you wrote about at InSession Film. That's on the 100 Passions list. Zita?
Yes. And he's a major filmmaker from this time period, and certainly an important figure in that he was part of that first wave of writers and directors in Hollywood. Before that point, around the early 40s, it was relatively rare for a screenwriter to transition into directing, but also to be able to work with their own screenplays. And you really do notice that his fingerprints are all over the projects that he works on. And you would think that Double Indemnity and The Apartment don't have much in common, but there really is a distinctive touch that you can sense in both films. And as Amy pointed out, he's a prolific filmmaker. He has an absurd number of absolute classic films in his filmography, and his influence on so many different genres can be felt. Double Indemnity, arguably the greatest film noir of all time. The Apartment, an absolute classic in the romance genre. Some Like It Hot, one of the greatest comedies of all time. You could go on and on and on. And I really think that this film, more than some of the others that he made, is what you would think of as a light-hearted good time. And I don't say that to put it down, but I do think a lot of people are sort of shocked when they come to something like The Apartment, which has been advertised as this romantic comedy that, oh my God, this is so dark. Shirley MacLaine is trying to kill herself halfway through the film, and it's about sexual harassment. It's a very difficult film to get through in many ways. It's a masterpiece, but it's certainly not a film that I feel you can sit down with a couple of friends and watch. It's something that really has to be digested in a very specific way. Whereas Some Like It Hot is probably closer to what we think of when we think of a classic Hollywood comedy. And it's perfectly constructed. It uses a bunch of iconic movie stars perfectly. And it really finds a way to sneak some of that sort of naughty content in there. And this is one of the things that we love about his films. As someone working when the Hays Code was active, he did find a way to subvert a lot of those tropes and to include more sexually explicit content in these films. And I love the fact that this movie, instead of being sort of crass or vulgar in its treatment of the sexual content, really does seem to be in awe of Marilyn Monroe's character in scenes where she's performing. And it's really great to see a film from this time period that I would say doesn't objectify women so much as celebrate their beauty and their sexuality.
I feel like the comedy with the sex winks is very genuine. It comes from a place where it doesn't have to put down other relationships in order to have all these wacky crisscrosses. And we've discussed classic directors and classic films. We've had bigger series on Hitchcock, but I feel like Billy Wilder, it's tough to capture his whole filmography. He did a lot of work in Europe initially, and then he comes over and he's writing things like Midnight, and I never say it right, Ninochka, and To Hold Back the Dawn. I like Ball of Fire, and I feel like he's the kind of director that you don't need to see his whole filmography. We've debated this before, where to me it's like, but when you see Some Like It Hot, you see the complete picture, and this is the reason why. And it's interesting that Ball of Fire, he wrote Double Indemnity, working with Barbara Stanwyck. He also worked with Marilyn Monroe, of course, before in the 7-Year Itch. And when I did Marilyn Monroe list at In Session Film, Some Like It Hot was my first choice, but I had the 7-Year Itch at number 4, which I think I've mentioned previously on the podcast. Just the wink of it, the idea that who's the hot upstairs girl? Well, maybe it's Marilyn Monroe, and with the, of course, famous, grates and the white dress and everything. But there's so much more to the movie than that. I think we discussed that more in our classic romantic comedies list.
Mhm.
I love that. To me, Some Like It Hot is what breaks the Hays Code. The Hays Code was already weaning, but to me, it's like this just blows it away, just completely abolishes it. And it's weird to say, you would think it's because of Marilyn Monroe being in that kind of little sheer sparkling and the way the spotlight is shining. Excellent black and white. We'll get into awards later because it was nominated for different kind of black and white set and cinematography. But the idea that she seems like she's topless is...
She absolutely does. I mean, she looks naked. It comes down to right over her nipples, and you're like, what?
And you're like, but that's not even the most scandalous thing of the movie. And yet I would think no fear of showing this movie to kids, because to me, you could perceive it as a completely straight comedy. There is crime, serious stuff in it. It's two bad witness, a mob hit. And so they decide to dress as women to hide out in an all-female jazz band. It's like, you could take it as completely on the surface as just a genuine, fun, lighthearted film. But then, the more you see it, there's just so many plays upon plays in the role reversals. And then, of course, you also have little song and dance fun moments, and I feel like everybody recognizes, when I just was looking on Twitter, going through the gift search, there's so much to choose from. There's just so many, when the train, toot whistle, kind of, the walk away.
With their dress.
The seams on the stockings, and when you see the color pictures of how hideous they actually look.
Which is why they had to do it in black and white, is because the makeup almost looked green on camera. And it almost was. I mean, they pushed for that to be in color.
But it wins best costumes for Ori Kelly, because just the way Monroe is dressed is just so divine. What should we talk about first then? If we're jumping into
so much. I also want to say, though, the one of the 8 billion reasons why Billy Wilder is who he is that even in his comedies, he also writes characters that can almost be haunted by sadness. And I felt that way with Sugar Cane, that as phenomenally beautiful as Marilyn Monroe is, her character really is kind of tragic, that she basically falls in love with these bums. And at the end, it's like she's getting hurt all over again. And it's hard to see her go through that. And yet I also like watching her be playful when she runs into Tony Curtis as Cary Grant on the beach. And she's like, oh, I went to Bryn Mawr and finishing school, and how she's kind of using her wits too, that she's not just this dumb blonde. And I like that about her. And I like that we get to see her not just with Tony Curtis, but that we get to see her kind of playful and be like gal pals with Jack Lemmon as Daphne. Like, that's adorable and fun. Their banter is terrific. When she climbs into his little bunk on, she's like, when my sister and I were little, like, we used to cuddle, and he's losing it. And it's just so great to see her get to be like one of the girls, because it just is. She's just playful, and she's happy, and she's effervescent. This is my favorite Marilyn Monroe movie.
Don't get the impression she's playing herself, but in previous of those song and dance comedies where it's like she's just the dumb blonde and that's it, with that marshmallow kind of voice. But here you get and in a way, because we're seeing the song and dance stuff on the road trip, but also like the behind the scenes of On the Road, where she's got like her hidden flask and it's the story of life, you know. And so that kind of, even she as Marilyn Monroe, which she even said, and there's been psychological studies, these Norma Jean versus Marilyn complexes, that even she as Marilyn Monroe has a facade kind of to her. And so that's the double play on play. And I was thinking of that with it because when Jack Lemmon, I'll have to use their names because otherwise I'll get confused.
Yes.
Josephine and Daphne. At first, he's the one who's like enjoying being the man among the women.
Yes.
And the way he is the one who ends up becoming the woman. But yet when he's in the little car, like bed thing with her, like she's climbing in and they're tickling, then other girls' heads are popping in and out.
Which is so hysterical.
He loves it. You know, and it's so funny. We jumped right into Some Like It Hot because I was feeling like I would have to defend this because as I said, this is 1959, and to me, it's strange to say this is the crowning achievement of a decade that starts out with Sunset Boulevard, Stylic, Sabrina, you know. Witness Prosecution is in there again, as you said, another director who's not defined by any kind of genre. Zita, how would you classify Some Like It Hot as a genre? Because I think it has it all.
I would generally classify it as a comedy, and I know that's a very broad umbrella to place it under, but I guess I feel more comfortable using that descriptor than, say, romance. I think there is a romantic subplot. I just don't see that as the driving engine of the narrative. And so I think it's funny throughout. It has a lot of the classical elements of this type of comedy. And obviously Wilder has a background in making this sort of film.
Because, well, you bring up an interesting point, how it's not about the romance, even though there are so many crisscrossing romantic would-be kind of elements in it. And Tony Curtis, of course, he's a musician who's dressed in drag, who's then also pretending to dress up as an oil tycoon doing.
But Cary Grant, he has said he was playing Cary Grant.
Again, the wink in it is, we may or may not know, what Cary Grant and Rudolph Scott were doing when they were living together type of thing. So the wink that he is playing the kind of iconic man who may not necessarily be the icon of masculinity that we think he is in order to woo Marilyn Monroe. It's like,
would audiences have picked up on that?
Because, the film was out the gate, popular, hit, reception, beloved. So I feel like, did people really get it at the time? I guess I don't know.
I would think not. But the wink that I loved is, first of all, the scene where Tony Curtis is in the bathtub and Jack Lemmon is going off on him and he's defending Marilyn Monroe, being like, why are you such a dirtbag? Like, this woman's been through enough. You know what I mean? Like, knock it off. And then he goes, and what's with that phony baloney voice? Nobody talks like this. And it's so funny.
I mean, there is a amusement of, okay, just men in drag who you would think are ugly women, the way they're made up.
Especially Tony Curtis, who was like the most masculine of masculine men.
There are send-ups, but it's not, Benny Hill running around in a kind of laugh, like just laugh at this for the sake of laughing at it. But, there's great beats and great timing. I mean, you do have these musical moments where it's time to get serious or it's time to laugh and have a good time with her little ukulele on the bus, or, sometimes they look so silly when they're sitting there like plucking their strings and pretend playing, their saxophone, and I guess even in a veiled way, even their instruments, that it's Tony Curtis who's playing a play-on-play of a man, is the saxophone, which even though I guess all instruments tend to be female, it seems like a more phallic instrument, but the bass is more symbolic of the guitar shape of a woman. And that's what Jack Lemmon is playing. I mean, that's looking way into it, but I love that there's music timing and there's comedic timing where sometimes it's just funny of like, oh, when they have to rush back to the room and hop in the bubble bath. So you don't know that, what clothes they're crisscrossing like in between or the last minute, like, oh no, I forgot to pull off the earrings,
Yes. I remember my students were like, he still has his earrings on. He still has his earrings on. Oh my gosh. But if we're talking about romantic moments, and I will die on this hill. And I want to know, first of all, I think Joe E. Brown absolutely does not get enough credit for his work in this film. That entire storyline would not work without him. He is just as strong as Jack Lemmon. And I have written about this in Session Film when I did people who were never nominated for an Academy Award and who they should have won. The fact that in 1959, two actors were more than robbed. Stephen Boyd for his work in Ben-Hur, which if he had won, I would have been okay with. Hugh Griffith, really? This is where we're going?
Okay. Amy, perfect point there. Not just the fact that they didn't win, they lost to the guy who's doing blackface.
Brownface!
It's terrible. It's awful.
And that Stephen Boyd wasn't even nominated? Are you kidding me? What?
Almost murdered a bunch of people on the set of Tom Jones. So I do not like it.
So you agree with me. Okay, so first of all, Stephen Boyd, where's the love? We love you. I know you're dead. You can't give me a call. But this entire plot would not work without Joey Brown. If we didn't buy this lecherous old dirtbag, and yet as gross as he is, he's still kind of charming. He really loves Daphne, and I also will die on the hill that he gets most of the best lines in the film when he's talking about the contortionists who could smoke with their feet, and he just says she could smoke cigarettes with their toes, and he takes a beat and then looks away and goes, Zowie. He's such a lecherous old man. And then, of course, the final line. Should I spoil it alert? On paper, the line, nobody's perfect. Who cares, right? Whatever, nobody's perfect. However, because Billy Wilder is the greatest ever filmmaker, that line is probably the most clever, brilliant, perfect ending to any movie. Because even up until the end, you're not quite sure where it's going. And I felt this way with Sunset Boulevard too, one of his other masterpieces, that you're sort of like, how is this going to end up? How is this going to work? Because this is all going to have to explode at some point. And it does in this totally unexpected way. And it's just bravo. And it always hits. And the chemistry he had with Jack Lemmon. Am I alone, or were we all kind of rooting for Daphne and Osgood at the end of the movie?
Who's the lucky girl? I am.
Oh, side note to audience members at home. This is famous. People know this. The scene with Who's the Lucky Girl? I Am, and Jack Lemmon's playing the maracas.
Oh, yes.
He had to refilm that scene because test audiences were laughing so hard that they were missing the joke. So they had to have him say a line and then dance and play the maracas and then say the next line, because they were that funny. And that scene is so brilliantly written and wonderful and perfect and amazing. I almost can't. It's just every scene in that movie is perfection, including even the opening, even the exposition where you're sort of like waiting for the plot to start with the funeral home, but it's speakeasy. So clever. So clever. And the whole bit with type O, blood type O throughout the entire movie. I can't. This movie is just perfect.
The irony of Ben-Hur is Stephen Boyd was playing Masala as like the jilted lover.
Mm-hmm.
And
by the way, Gore Vidal was a co-writer of the screenplay. Yeah. So I think that probably
and so yet he doesn't win supporting actor for Ben-Hur. It goes to, the goofy chic thing. But because of Ben-Hur sweeps, of course, Charlton Heston wins for Ben-Hur. And I love Ben-Hur. I love Charlton Heston in Ben-Hur. I mean, it is a magnum opus of a film, and it looks so exceptional on Blu-ray. But Jack Lemmon is nominated for Some Like It Hot. Zita, I know you're not a fan of Ben-Hur. Did Jack Lemmon deserve to win for this?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone's singing at once.
I don't think anyone looks at that Charlton Heston performance and thinks, yes, this is an example of great acting.
And he was recreating his role from like 5 other movies that he did. He's literally Moses, except just with a different name.
Yes. And so I think it's frustrating if you're a fan of Jack Lemmon, as I think everyone of us.
He's a likable.
It's sort of frustrating that the films that he won his Oscars for don't really feature his best work. I think he's solid in Save the Tiger, but it's very strange that is the one film that he won the Best Actor Academy Award for.
It is strange. The hard thing that I need to remember is that, okay, so this year, I think he deserved it in 1959. The following year, The Apartment, easily. If he had won for The Apartment, he would have been one of the best winners of all time. However, it's hard because he lost to Burt Lancaster, who really was phenomenal in Elmer Gantry. So it's hard to kind of argue that. 1962, Days of Wine and Roses, one of the greatest dramatic performances of all time. However, he was also up against Peter O'Toole for Lawrence of Arabia and Gregory Peck, who won for To Kill a Mockingbird. So it's hard because I think those are some of his best, most iconic roles. And yet, with an exception of Heston, I can kind of see why he didn't win those.
But the irony, we've discussed this when we've done some women's series, doing some of these, looking at Best Actress winners, how there seems to be a pattern of, okay, you put your dues in, you get supporting nominations, then you put your dues in, then you get actor nominations, or you get makeup ones for the film you should have deserved. And 74, Save the Tiger, feels like a makeup Oscar. Like,
absolutely.
Because it was like, oh, we already gave it to you out the gate for supporting actor for Mr. Roberts, which again is another, I just threw your stinking palm tree out the window.
What year was that? What year was Mr. Roberts? That was like 55.
55, 56 was the award.
Yeah, that might have been one of the reasons why he didn't win. And that really makes me angry, Academy.
And
because really, he has so many Academy Award worthy roles.
Even though Some Like It Hot was so beloved and well received at the time, part of it is also still like, well, you're a man who was playing a woman in a way seriously. You weren't playing it like it was a joke, like it was a gag, that they were just undercover women. And, and I think we'll be discussing more of these type of films, different cross-dressing, queer coding, LGBT kind of films in the future with some guests. But, how is it the 80s was also supposed to be so conservative, and yet it was like bosom buddies, all over the place, So to me, I think that people had no problem with the humor of drag, so long as it was a mockery almost of women. Like I said, with Benny Hill, even in Priscilla, he says, what is this, Outback with Benny Hill?
And Milton Berle.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
But the thing that
to play it genuine is like, wait, what? And then to have Joey Brown, where it's almost like, this is such an adorable little relationship.
I leave the movie rooting for them. And the fact that Joey Brown has the absolutely perfect thing, it's like, that's love. That is love. And they could have made it work. And I love that scene with him and Tony Curtis and the maracas and why would man want to marry man? Security. And when he shows him the jewelry and he says, oh, he got me these. And he's like, oh my God, these are real diamonds. And Jack Lemmon says, of course he is. Do you think my fiance's a bum? It's so sweet.
All Zita's, the traditional films at the time, it almost seems like it would have been the love triangle. Which man is Marilyn Monroe going to choose once she finds out the true story? And then it kind of becomes something else. You've got Tony Curtis playing this within role, saying he's like frigid, I think is the term he uses when he means like impotent, and she's got to keep kissing him to see if there's a reaction.
And his glasses fog up. Oh, like I said, there's not a detail of that movie. And she kisses him, the glasses are fogged. He's like, I didn't feel anything. And you're like, oh, Tony Curtis, you're such a bad boy.
But Zita said she would not describe this as a romantic film. But see, we're already talking about how there's multiple romantic relationships and crisscrossings happening here. And it almost seems like this is like a French throwback or like a screwball kind of comedy twist.
Well, that's one thing we should note, and I wanted to ask, have either of you seen the film that this is based on? Because it's a
What?
remake.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's
It's
like
a remake of the French film Fanfare of Love from 1935. Have you seen
No.
it? And if so, what do you think of it?
it's
I
one of
haven't.
they even credit it because isn't it like a script of something like a remake from Europe or something?
No, it's a direct remake of this 19.
Okay. I didn't even think they credited it as that, but I know it's nominated for adapted screenplay, so I guess so.
Yeah. The plot is two unemployed male musicians disguise themselves as women so they can join an all-female orchestra headed for the French Riviera.
That's
I
it.
don't care. I'm willing to risk my entire life and say that this was one of those cases where the remake is better.
Yes,
I don't
from
think
what
the crime
everyone-
element-
I'm just saying it.
The vein with the constantly running into the gangsters, like you're already in drag trying to keep your disguise, but then you're also pretending to be a man, but then you're when others pretending to be a woman trying to distract the man so he can woo the girl, and then the whole time they're running through the hotel trying to avoid like the gangster convention, which is just this extra kind of bookend on the whole thing. So I mean, there are people who could look at it as guys hiding out from gangsters, but then there are people who could look at it as just, two men in disguise. And the visuals, I guess, are kind of cute. I like their hotel, and it has this cabana kind of feeling. And she talks about the jazz, like in it hot and the beach. But then there are some kind of soft focus kind of things, or some a little like when Sugar's running towards the boat in her little high heels, and she is just like jiggling and glittering all over the place.
She jiggles a lot in this movie.
Well, they win
in the best possible way,
and and she's today we would say she was a big girl at this point. I mean, she just had other personal issues, and I think had different health issues at this time. But then there are scenes when you see the back of her clothes, and the whole backs are like open nets, like all the way down to like her tailbone, and you think, how is she like sewn into these costumes? That they're just exceptional. Like you could
dress on the boat.
Yeah,
looks like it's about to slide completely off.
You could watch.
I'm like, how is she holding this dress up?
Her. Or there's so many reasons to come to this movie. Come to this movie for Marilyn Monroe. Come for the comedy. Come for the silly gangster stuff.
George Raft, who is a serious gangster actor, is playing a comedic gangster. P.S. Another piece of trivia: I heard that he was the one that taught Joey Brown and Jack Lemmon how to tango.
Not surprising. I mean, you come for one thing and you just stay for everything else, and it just keeps on giving. And I think you could look at this film totally innocently, or you could just, again, sociology study everything that's happening in this movie. Zita, do you like Some Like It Hot better than The 7-Year Itch?
Yes, I think this is an improvement on that film in so many regards. My real issue with The 7-Year Itch is that it's very much a play that has been adapted for the screen, and I don't think he really succeeds in opening it up enough. And so it really does feel as though, I'm watching a filmed stage play. It doesn't have the lightness of touch that's on display here. And while I would praise it for taking a very progressive approach to discussing gender relations, I don't think it quite has the depth or the pathos of Some Like It Hot.
The 7-Year Itch, as we said, is like the crowning like iconography of Marilyn Monroe. And because I think it's interesting the way Wilder kind of worked out here. You have The 7-Year Itch, which is the crowning achievement of Marilyn Monroe. You would think the white great with the skirt blowing up. And then you get Some Like It Hot, where it's more like you're seeing the behind the scenes of Monroe. And then after this, from Jack Lemmon, you get The Apartment. And the way that he kind of works 2 for 2 at a time, and even previously, wrote Ball of Fire, then Double Indemnity, like Barbara Stanwyck, the way he kind of knows how to, I don't know, give the film that the audience will want of the stars, but then also give them like a second. I don't even know if there might have been contract deals like 2-4 kind of films where then, well, no, then we're going to give you the real meaty kind of role. You know what I mean? Even though it's tough for me to say like The Apartment is the more meaty role, because the way Jack Lemmon is in this movie, I mean, there's so much to chew on as well. Amy.
Another great thing about Billy Wilder is that if you think about some of the best actors, he really knows how to use these performers.
Your man, Style Like 17, William Holden.
Yeah, he knew how to best showcase them. And if you think about Gloria Swanson hadn't made Sunset Boulevard. How many of us, I mean, it's a little different because we're weird and we watch a lot of classic films. How many of us really would really almost know who she was? And I think he got the best out of Marilyn Monroe. And Jack Lemmon. And again, these aren't terrible actors. You know what I mean? These aren't like Jack Lemmon. Picking a best Jack Lemmon performance is impossible because he has about 17 best performances, but that he, right when they finished Some Like It Hot, to then go back to Jack Lemmon and be like, hey, I've got another movie the next year. And again, The Apartment is a very funny movie, but in a very, very different way. It's a completely different kind of humor. And Jack Lemmon's character is more of a melancholy character, which, like I said, he really knows how to get these sad, moving, profound, and poignant scenes. I think The Apartment's less overtly funny for me. And I probably said this in one of the other episodes, but I'm going to say it again because we're talking about Billy Wilder and The Apartment. At the beginning, when I think it's Mr. Dobish it's the first couple leaving the apartment, and he's leaving with this mistress, and he wants to give the girl like bus fare or whatever. And she's like, no, I'll take a cab. And he's like, fine. Where do you live? She's like, I live in the Bronx. And he goes, why do you dames all got to live in the Bronx? And she stops and says, you mean you take other women here? And he goes, certainly not. I'm a happily married man. I think that's the funniest line in the movie. That line like makes me die laughing because it is so funny, but it's also such a dark line. Like, yeah. And I also give him credit because he showed in 1960, look at these men, look how they were treating women. And as much as it's quote unquote a comedy, it really shows the tragedy of how women were treated. And in that way, The Apartment is light years ahead of its time.
And it's funny because Jack Lemmon, I feel like today people remember more as a comedic actor because like Zita, even then he does Shirley MacLaine again in like Irma, I never say it right, Irma LaDouche. But then you also get a couple of the Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau pairings, you know, the Front Page and all. So it's like Wilder did continue to work in the 60s and 70s, but I do feel like this was his peak.
I agree. I love his work in the 60s. Of course, he was brilliant. Even Glenn Ross. He's amazing. And he had a long, brilliant, wonderful career.
Are we going to have a seance? Billy?
My favorite, call me Jack. But his Billy Wilder films are, I will say it, his best films.
Well, Amy has just said that it would be impossible to narrow this down. But as someone who is clearly a big Lemmon enthusiast, let's say, what are your top 5 Lemmon performances, if that's not too difficult?
Days of Wine and Roses, The Apartment, Some Like It Hot, The Odd Couple, Glenn Ross.
What? Not Grumpier Old Men?
I love those too. That's the problem, is he's so good. But it just really, what a range he had that he did between 1959 and 1962. He did Some Like It Hot, The Apartment, and Days of Wine and Roses. And he was Oscar worthy in every single one of those performances. But yes, he was also hysterical and grumpy old man.
Is it wrong to say, like, most people, when they think of Tony Curtis, don't they think of Some Like It Hot?
I would say yes. And I love it because he's so overtly masculine, yet totally pulled off this part that you forget that it's a man playing a woman for a while. He really had the voice down.
And for me, this was a real revelation, I would say, because I wasn't super impressed with, say, his performance in Spartacus. And so I had relatively low expectations for him in this one, especially up against Jack Lemmon, who's an expert comedian. And I remember being really surprised that he sort of holds his own. And while this might sound blasphemous, almost outshines Lemmon in the first half of the film. And then in the back half, obviously, Lemmon goes off and he's amazing and he does his own thing. But I remember being shocked by how great his comic timing is. And when we talk about the sort of emotional weight of the film, I think a lot of it is really derived from his performance.
I think we talked previously, it might have been on your 300 Passions podcast, Zita, about Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, where it's, even if the girls are trying to land men, the movie is still about their friendship together. It's them walking off together at the end. Like, whether they're partnered with people is not going to affect them or not. And this movie starts out where you think it's going to be a triangle, like which man in drag is Marilyn Monroe going to choose. But then somewhere along the film, it does become a quartet of relationships, and they're all in the boat at the end. And it's like she does go for the man who's pretending to be a different, more masculine man who was in drag within meta. But then you also have the man as a woman. Nobody's perfect, in a relationship with a man. So it's like they each find their own relationships, but in the way they did not expect, in the way the viewer did not expect, in the way, I don't know if 1959 really expected. And maybe that's what they loved it because it was just a complete lark. I don't know that they realized there was such a deep-seated, very provocative role reversal, multiple role reversal things here happening at the time. So there's such a certain charm in the innocence of it to me. To me, you could look at it straightforward and say that it's because they're so genuine. It doesn't matter. Nobody's perfect at the end when it's two men, kind of thing. But yet it's like, oh my God, that seems so shocking at the same time. But it's just so charming and lovable. And this is another one of those, if we're talking about queer coding kind of films, to me, this is a pride movie. Even though obviously he's strapped in 59, still, kicking the Hays Code out the door. There can't be overt things in this, but I kind of like that it's not overt, or what is overt, you can just take at face value. I don't know, because there's so much within to, I don't like the word unpack, but there's a lot to unpack in this movie as well.
I would say the fact that the movie ends, a traditional romantic comedy would have ended with Marilyn and Tony Curtis walking off together, and it would have ended on them with a kiss, and it would have ended, and you just sort of would have phased out the Osgood character and not really ended and not really wrapped up that storyline, because it wouldn't acknowledge that relationship. It would just be like,
this would have been the humorous decoy.
He runs away. Yeah, that Jack Lemmon runs away from him. And then that's and that's his ending, is that Jack Lemmon kind of ends up alone because he's the funny guy. So it's kind of okay. And then it ends up with Marilyn and Tony Curtis, but it doesn't. They're literally in the back of the boat, and it ends with that one of the, again, Billy, I can't with you in your screenwriting.
Another intriguing, it's thrown out as a joke just when Daphne Jack Lemmon is saying at first, "Oh, I can never have children." That's
and the music gets all sad,
and then finally rips off the wig. Now I'm a man. There's so many multiple of just men and women's roles and goals and their age. I mean, I don't know how old the men are supposed to be because they look old as like old women.
They look like 1950s men.
Yeah, you know, there's just all kinds of multiple things happening, and which is just so fascinating for a film that, again, you could just blow off as, you know, Marilyn Monroe singing "I Want to Be Loved by You."
But that Osgood is willing to accept those things about Daphne. Like, let's talk about that for a minute. That I can't have kids, I smoke, I used to live with the man, and he's like, that's okay, I love you, that's okay, I love you. And that's really wonderful. And I think people don't recognize that, how much they were the ones, in my opinion, they are the ones I genuinely root for. Daphne is a fascinating character, even if it's not, even if she is not quote unquote real. But I love that. I love that he was like, I don't care, I love you anyway. And then the big reveal, and you expect this whole, oh my God, whatever. And it's just like, well, nobody's perfect. And it's like, yes, that's what love is.
Every person in the film is playing at some sort of duality. Even the gangsters are there for like an opera convention.
Yes,
you know,
Rigoletto.
You know, we got our men, you know, our two leading men who are playing women, who are also playing into kind of further things. And you've got Monroe playing this kind of behind the scenes kind of unhappiness.
But she's trying to pretend that she's this high society girl to impress a rich guy.
You know, and it's like, and you get to the end where the person who is playing, you know, the relatively not, I don't want to say straight man as the in the role, you know, is like, it's okay, you know. And it's funny to think that this film in 1959 was ahead of some of the backwoods thinking that we have in this country today. That's a whole other issue of like, it's okay. You know, yeah, you want to be in the jazz band, you want to make something big of yourself, that's okay. You want to pretend you're an oil tycoon, that's okay. You're a man dressed as a woman, that's okay too.
And she just keeps kissing him. It's just
and we said lemon after The Apartment. Again, it's ironic that you have Tony Curtis and Some Like It Hot, and then the, you know, uber masculine but sword and sandal kind of winking of Spartacus as well, all happening around the same time. And it's like, okay.
And his character in Spartacus dealt with homosexuality.
Zita, are these sort of the grandfather of pride films?
I'm not entirely sure, because you have obviously a lot of earlier films that feature queer content, that are very queer coded, and that are made by queer filmmakers. So I think going all the way back,
the Bride of Frankenstein.
Queer culture has always been a huge part of filmmaking, especially in Hollywood. I would say, even if it's not overt, it has always been there. And so you have a George Cukor in the 30s, for example, and you can clearly see the influence of his culture on his films. And so to credit Some Like It Hot with being the first probably isn't accurate, but it is great to see a film that does seem relatively non-judgmental about drag, about defying gender roles. And for a film from the 50s, obviously that's quite radical, because we typically think of this as probably one of the most conservative periods in America's history. And this was one of many films that led to the Hays Code becoming less effective, you could say. And its success as an independent production really did pave the way for a lot of other films to be a bit more irreverent.
I don't know if obviously it's outright like this, but to me, 1959, Some Like It Hot, without this movie, I don't think you would have had Psycho in 1960. Even though, you know, obviously I feel like, you know, different production, different things happening at the time. But again, I've spoken about Psycho on the podcast previously. The idea of the man dressing as the woman, the mother and son complexes, my favorite scene with Arbogast, the lawman coming into the house and ascending the top of the stairs, and then, you know, getting thrust down the bottom of the stairs. And you don't see the knife, but the idea that it's a penetration of a man dressed as a woman, and the king of his castle kind kind of tropes being torn down. And if anybody has fault with Psycho, they don't like that end conversation where they explain it all as, oh, well, it's a transvestite type thing at the end, trying to explain it all away. But the idea that these films at this time were coming around of like addressing what was going on in America, if Psycho was based on, some other crazy earlier criminals, and I'm not equating, criminality, but the idea that films were beginning to discuss, the heck with the Hays Code. They were discussing what they wanted to discuss and playing at these kind of the audience as voyeur views, or the audience is open and accepting of new ideas at the time, which I love. That's why I, applaud and continue to hold up these films. Amy, did I ask you your Wilder top 3? Because I said right off the bat, to me, Some Like It Hot is Wilder's seminal film, but there's so many to choose.
Sunset Boulevard, Some Like It Hot, The Apartment. And there's like 15 others. Like after that, those are just my top.
Zita, where was Some Like It Hot on your ranking? Is it your Wilder tops? Is it your tops of the 50s?
Oh God, this is so difficult again, because Wilder is one of the greats. And so I feel as though saying that it's second tier Wilder for me isn't really a knock on the film. It's just that when you make a movie like The Apartment, it's sort of impossible to measure regular films against it. It's ridiculous that he came out with so many of these movies that were of such a high level of quality. And so I do not want to make it sound as though I do not appreciate Some Like It Hot, but ranking Wilder's films is near impossible for me. And in terms of the 50s as a whole, yes, it's definitely up there. I think it's one of the great Hollywood products of this era, and I'm really glad that it came out at a time when things were starting to turn in terms of the depiction of certain content on screen. And I really think that it's a fascinating snapshot of Hollywood going through a very significant transition.
Thank you. See, you just say it so much more eloquently than I was trying to say it. Some Like It Hot was number 1 on my Marilyn Monroe list at InSession Film. And Amy talked about the How Was That Not Nominated of 1959 supporting actors. But and the podcast series, I know there's bonus content and episodes on Patreon, but the extra film series also did several Billy Wilder series. So you can go back to InSessionFilm.com or your favorite podcast listener and find all of those previous episodes. But there was also a list at InSession of ranking all of Billy Wilder's films. And Some Like It Hot was number 6. Now, was this Mr. J. Ledbetter?
I'm sorry. I have issues.
Yes, this was Mr. J. Ledbetter. Jay, don't call Amy.
So what? I need to see this alleged list.
At InSessionFilm.com, number 1 with Sunset Boulevard.
Okay,
2, Ace in the Hole.
That's actually a better movie than most people think. That's not one of his better known. It is good.
Number 3 is The Apartment. Number 4, 1, 2, 3.
I can't do it. I'm making a face for people at home.
5 is Double Indemnity. As if we didn't have enough topics, enough to discuss, because we're women with so many opinions. Now we could just go to InSessionFilm.com and just start roasting everything.
I would agree. If someone said that their top 3 Billy Wilders were Sunset Boulevard, Double Indemnity, and The Apartment, mazel tov. I think that that's a great top list. But I mean, I love Stalag 17. I don't put it on the same level as Some Like It Hot. But since someone mentioned about Academy Award nominations, I am, and watching it again, I'm annoyed that Tony Curtis did Tony Curtis ever get nominated for an Oscar?
Spartacus,
yes,
right?
He got nominated for the Defiant Ones. He was a best actor.
Okay. So, but I think he deserved one. I think Monroe deserved one. And again, Joey Brown should have absolutely been nominated. And the possible winners, the acceptable winners for that year would have been Stephen Boyd for Ben-Hur, or Joey Brown for Some Like It Hot, and neither of them was even nominated. So if someone can explain that to me.
Number 7 on the Jay Ledbetter's ranking was Witness for the Prosecution.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Was 12. We've had our discussions about William Holden and Montgomery Clift, awards contenders. Some Like It Hot was nominated for director, actor Jack Lemmon, adapted screenplay, art and set black and white, cinematography black and white, and it won for black and white costume design.
And no best picture. Explain that.
That is the year of Ben-Hur. Which,
but it wasn't nominated for best picture. Wasn't that up against like A Nun's Story?
Yeah. I know. You look through the 5
and like Room at the Top. That was that year. Ugh.
This is one of those, and again, we've discussed, of course, our Titanic discourse, but when people say like, oh, Titanic being nominated for all the Oscars, did it deserve to win? I'm like, no. But when people are like, oh, Ben-Hur that was nominated for all those Oscars, did they deserve to win? I'm like, but yes. I mean, I
understand that. I understand getting the best picture win. I understand it getting the best director win. The fact that Some Like It Hot wasn't nominated, but
I mean, I also love Anatomy of a Murder, but it's like, did I think it was worthy of like all these?
Anatomy of a Murder is great. Sorry, of all the ones in that category, that's the one that I wouldn't push out.
I know.
But A Nun's Story, The Diary of Anne Frank.
But, but honestly, the thing is, to me, like, I think Ben-Hur is a very inspirational film, but I think you can.
Agreed.
I think you can take it for its technical achievements, just for its exceptional storytelling, that you can see why it's so great, that it's a moving film. And to me, Some Like It Hot is just, anybody can watch Some Like It Hot. You don't even need to be interested in queer drag films. It's just an exception.
No,
The Diary of Anne Frank. Oh my gosh. Hated reading that book. Hated watching it in school. To me, it's just so upsetting. I can't get through it. It's like, no, it's no. No,
and let's face it,
still too soon.
Genre films, comedies don't really win awards.
No,
and it's sad. But I'm not gonna dump on Ben-Hur. I can't really even be that upset that Charlton Heston won. Like, okay, he only really could do one thing, but he did that one thing better than anybody else. And I will say that no one could have done the one thing that he could do better than him. But
I love Some Like It Hot, and there's how many iconic scenes can you pick out? But just that, for as long as Ben-Hur is, the scene where he falls to the ground and and you never see the Christ figure, but the little cue of the music comes up and there's just someone else who comes and hands him the water. And then it's like Charlton Heston, he looks up and he knows. And it's just, because for as much as we expect, Big Chuck and all the NRA stuff that ended up happening type stuff later, it's just this moment of like, again, very choice, again, wilder direction, exceptional, of like, you don't have to do anything in this scene. It's beautiful. We could spend a whole other time talking about
if he was going to lose to anyone, yes, that is exactly who he should have won.
Because he made up such an ugly woman. But to say Jack Lemmon gave a beautiful performance in Some Like It Hot.
I loved Daphne. I was like, maybe he could live as Daphne, and he and Osgood could live and go to shows and live a wonderful life. I really think that they would be very happy together.
I'm curious. We'll be discussing Tootsie in the future, because we'll get into awards there, because obviously you cannot nominate anybody for Best Actress in Some Like It Hot. In a weird way, you would in a weird way, it's not fair to take away from the females in the category, but in a weird way, could you say Jack Lemmon deserved Best Actress for Some Like It Hot? Is it terrible, provocative to say, Zita?
No, I don't think that works though, because I think a big part of the joke is that, oh, he's a man dressing up as a woman.
True, but the fact that the film is so good, that his performance is so good, that the idea that you could take it as genuine, this man who starts out thinking he's just going to hide out in this all-female band. He's enjoying the ladies. Then he gets into this other unique kind of relationship, and just then he fully kind of embraces it. Who's the lucky girl? I am. And it initially kind of starts, well, he thinks he's just going to be a gold digger. Oh, he's going to get such a settlement when he finds out of the divorce kind of thing, but then he comes to, it's ironic because to me, by taking off the wig and embracing that he's in this new relationship, it's like and as I said, we'll get into Tootsie, the being with you as a woman made me a better man.
Which is true.
So I don't know. I love the fact that, to me, you could look at it and say, well, it isn't even about the male character that he's playing. Who were they? Joe and Jerry. We're referring to him as that.
I love how he goes at the beginning. He's like, fine, I'll be Geraldine. And then when he introduces himself, he's like, I'm Daphne. And Tony Curtis looks at him like, what are you even talking about? And he's like, I just like the name.
But I said of the pun of even the instruments, but the idea of Joe and Josephine, how a Josephine can even be a Joe. Like there's kind of double kind of puns in here.
And yet he just embraces being Daphne. And I love that. I also have to say real quick, while we're talking about the movie at all, I love the other women in the band. They are so much fun. And I love that it shows women being naughty. These aren't prim proper women.
Yeah, the moment she goes behind the curtain in the cab car, all of a sudden they all just pop out again, like, ooh,
yes,
and they're all under things.
They're drinking and they're telling jokes. I love it about the one-legged jockey. Like, I want to hear that joke. And they're telling dirty jokes and they're drinking and mixing cocktails. Oh, I want to party with these.
You bring up a good point. It's the men who are disguised as women in the all-female band who are musicians, who you would think are traveling Lotharios, who have to be on their best behavior while they're in disguise. But yet it's the women who are scandalously traveling musicians who are, in a way, taking on the more masculine roles in the film. Again, see, as we're talking, things just keep on giving.
And at the beginning, and it's Tony Curtis who's like, nope, I'm going to bed, leave me alone, pull this down, wearing the full nightgown. And of course, like they had to, but yeah, you've got these women who have the hooch up their, in their garter belts. And it's like, these girls are fun. And I love that. And again, I don't think you saw a lot of that in the 1950s.
Now, Some Like It Hot did win a lot of Golden Globes. Obviously, Jack Lemmon won for actor. Monroe wins a motion picture, musical, or comedy, but Monroe wins for best actress in a musical or comedy, which
good for her.
But makes me wonder now, where would you place her if you were giving her an Oscar nomination? Because I wouldn't say she's the best actress. And again, these technicalities to me, she would belong in supporting actress in the film because she's not the lead woman. I think that the man.
She is though. Yeah. I absolutely would have put her in lead. Again, when I'm thinking supporting, I'm thinking like Joey Brown. You know what I'm saying? Like she definitely was the lead, and she was also had top billing with the other guys. That was not a supporting
technicalities. Because again, a supporting actor is such a mess. I don't understand how Hugh Griffin wins over Stephen Boyd, but then
how he was nominated over him.
I love Anatomy of a Murder, but you've got 2 spots taken up by Anatomy of a Murder, and you're like, really? Yeah.
Oh, both of those actors deserve.
I know, but to me, then I would still say Jimmy Stewart is the best thing of Anatomy of a Murder.
I would agree with you.
Zita, where would you put Monroe? Best actress over Simone Signoret?
So that gets tough because Simone Signoret is one of the
which is much more of a supporting role. I want to just toss that in.
One of the greatest actresses of all time. She is superb. She has never given a bad performance in anything. And so I'm just so thankful that she, as someone who primarily worked not in the English language, that she was able to win an Oscar. And so I'm fine with that win. I guess I agree with Amy in that it is a supporting role. It would make more sense as a win in the supporting category. But I don't mind that award win. And one thing that I love about her Academy Award win is that you have a photograph of her in the crowd, I think getting up, ready to collect her award. And she decides to cup her breasts in the middle of this crowd. And it looks insane. Everyone's just sitting there normally looking on. And she is full on groping herself. And I love it. She's wonderful.
To me, that this Some Like It Hot again blew the floodgates open. And also we should point out this is 1959, but it does take place in like the 20s or 30s because they're running away from gangsters. It's meant to be like the Valentine's Day massacre type things happening. Because also Katharine Hepburn and Elizabeth Taylor were both nominated for Best Actress for Suddenly Last Summer. I'm not sure if we talked about this in detail in the Montgomery Clift episode, but again, a film that was made in the 50s that takes place in the 30s. And they want to lobotomize Elizabeth Taylor because she knows that like the gay son was cruising for boys kind of thing. And
got
film,
eaten.
yeah, but yet the film can't say what it's really trying to say. You know, another one of these kind of Tennessee.
We procured for him.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's all I remember about the movie.
Yeah, you know, it's one. It can't say what it wants to say. Again, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Tennessee Williams kind of being cut off at the knees for the film adaptation. But to me, I think that Monroe deserves supporting actress for Some Like It Hot. I mean, again, because I can't get through the Diary of Anne Frank, and if you ask me between Shelley Winters and Marilyn Monroe, who would I choose? I would choose Marilyn Monroe,
especially since Winters had already won.
Mm-hmm.
Or was this her first?
I don't know.
When was A Patch of Blue?
Patch of Blue came 6 years later, so this was her first win.
Okay. I could see why they give it to her because by this point she'd been nominated. She was nominated, what, first 1951?
Yes.
In A Place in the Sun, your favorite movie. Just kidding. JK.
Zita, if you were analyzing Best Supporting Actress, does Monroe, you don't think she belongs there?
No, I think of her as more of a lead because I think what Amy points out definitely makes sense. You have all of these sort of supporting characters on the periphery who have much smaller roles than she does. And so to put, say, Joe E. Brown in the supporting category and then to have Marilyn in the supporting category, it doesn't quite make sense just because she gets so much more to do. And so she makes more sense in the lead category.
Even if in the film, I'll go on a limb and say that it's about our two boys as, you know, men as musicians, as, you know, men as disguise, and as what ultimately becomes one becoming the more masculine role in a relationship and one becoming the more female role in a relationship. To me, it's like the two at the top. But that's just, again, to me, so many multiple round and rounds of the film that have so much, you know, performances within performances, meta before meta was meta all around. I should ask you, Zita, because you did not think Some Like It Hot was the seminal Billy Wilder film. Are there any flaws in this movie? Are we blinded by our love?
No, I wouldn't identify anything about it that I necessarily take issue with. It's more that I just feel a deeper emotional connection to something like The Apartment.
Because it's so funny. You would think that, again, a straightforward, maybe even 10 years before, I feel like this would have been much more musical dominated in a way, be more about all the musical numbers than what other things are actually happening, the farce of it all. But then again, it was nominated for art or set black and white decoration. Like there's a scene with like where they're looking in their compact mirror and like looking at the gangsters when they're getting like in and out of the elevator and they're looking through and they're under the table and all you see are like all the spats. Like there's a lot of little technical things in here to notice as well, where again, I come back to it's a technically perfect film. It's a well paced, well written, well performed, well acted. Amy, are there any detractors of Some Like It Hot?
I don't think so. I think this is a pretty perfect film. And I will also say that if I could start a personal crusade so they would stop taking Billy Wilder films and making them into Broadway musicals, I would do that. I would, as a billionaire, buy the rights and say, stop making second-rate musicals based on his brilliant work, because the reason his work is brilliant is because he is at the helm. And all of the Broadway versions, and I can say this because my parents are literally going to see it on Broadway next week, and they have not watched the movie yet. Mom, Dad, I love you. Please watch this movie.
Mom and Dad, don't call me.
Yes, Mom and Dad don't. And I told them, I said, I want you to actually promise me that you will watch this movie, because as good and cute as I'm sure it has cute music, and I'm sure it's super awesome, and the dancing is really great. I don't care, because you are not going to get better than a film directed and co-written by Billy Wilder, starring Jack Lemmon, Tony Curtis, Marilyn Monroe, Joey Brown, George Raft, and everyone else. And I really do. I need to hear this joke about the one-legged jockey, which, by the way, is a reoccurring joke. I forgot that comes up in a couple different scenes. I do. I want to party with these girls. They look so much fun.
I love that. Again, you could take it totally seriously as these within performances and the coding in the film and what it means to kick the Hays Code and, really just bring the 50s, capped to an end. But at the same instance, it's comedy, what comedy gets right. It's not laughing at the people, who are wearing, the men, looking ugly. I mean, I think there are a few jokes of like, don't shine the light on them or push them in the back of the band, kind of things. But they're not laughing at them, or they're not even, yes, they are laughing with them, but it's doing what comedy should, which I just feel it's a tough thing to explain. But it's when comedy is able to embrace, they're not making, to me, good comedy is when everybody can laugh at it. When you're not, making fun of anybody. And I don't think this film is making fun of anybody. I think it's just a charming, wonderful little film. I don't think it ever gets old. I don't think it ever gets tired. I don't feel like it's a 1959 film in some ways, even though I know it's 1959. Part of me feels like it almost feels much more mid 60s in its progressiveness. I don't know. Zita, I think it's better than some contemporary films in getting the correct. Zita.
It does feel surprisingly modern. And just one note, I would have loved it if, after all of the sort of gushing that we'd been engaged in, Amy said, well, actually, there are a couple of flaws that I would like to address.
I really can't think of any.
But no,
I really
maybe
can't.
If you had to fault the soft focus filming on Monroe, sometimes there's
No, I think she looked amazing.
No, that it's
bravo.
The point of the film, when there's spotlights on her and she's in the front of the stage singing the sad songs, when he comes up and kisses her right on the stage. I mean, again, this idea of what we define as woman. Here's the perfect woman up in front of us to entertain us, and she's singing a sad song. And again, I just said how much I love the comedy, and you're like, but wait, that's a moment in the film, like that's a serious moment. So what are you gonna fault? Yeah, soft focus on Monroe.
She looked amazing. How else are you gonna film her? And the thing is it's one of those films, and this happens with, I would say, most Billy Wilder films. The more I watch it, the more perfect I realize it is. I pick up on more jokes. I pick up on more little facial expressions. I pick up on how perfectly worded all of the lines are. I mean, I watched Sunset Boulevard 150,000 times before I realized the line, I know you, I know your face. You used to be big, you used to be famous. That he says, I know your face, which is a perfect line, because Norma Desmond, that's her whole thing, is her face. So instead of saying, I recognize you, didn't you used to be in movies? It's, I know your face. And that is why Billy Wilder is the greatest screenwriter of all time. Thank you for coming to my TED
If
Talk.
this were made today, I feel like it would try too hard or go too far. Like, I don't know, the chicks in the train would be topless or doing even worse stuff, or it wouldn't be a comedy. It would be a dark comedy. There would be too much cynicism about it, or it would be too complicated, which even though
they'd add like homophobia to
even
it.
though we're talking about a lot of, crisscrossing romance, it's not complicated in this film, which is refreshing. Zita, could Some Like It Hot be made today?
well, I think that's always a difficult question, in part because I think it ignores the fact that it would have to be different. Today, I think the idea that any film from any era could be exactly reproduced during another period is inaccurate. Obviously, the social mores of our time are going to impact how a film looks and what message it wants to send. And so I think obviously it would have to be a very different film. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. For as much as I love these movies from, say, the late 50s, if someone made an exact reproduction of Gigi now, I don't want that. Give me something that responds to the times that we are living in. And so I think you could produce an interesting film today that takes the bare bones of Some Like It Hot, but obviously it would be very different because different people would be making it, for example. So yeah, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing.
I don't know that there's any cast that I would trust in these kind of roles. I don't know, because nobody could replace Marilyn Monroe. Although I'm sure somebody could probably try remaking this film as is. And like one time, a few years ago, there was an "Are You Being Served" special, and it's on BritBox now, where it was a one-off episode, and it wasn't people just playing. They were in the department store. They were playing the characters as they were played on Are You Being Served? And it was just like, stop trying to play the role of the other people. So today I feel like somebody would be trying to be Marilyn Monroe. And in some ways, are all actresses trying to be Marilyn Monroe? That's another issue. But what would Billy Wilder be making today? Because we're talking about these, how you can make such a lighthearted comedy like Something Like It Hot and turn around and make a, to me, it's not a comedy, something serious like The Apartment. What would he be doing today?
I don't know. All I know is it would be perfect. See, the last lines of the movie, nobody's perfect. You know what? True. But you know what is perfect? Billy Wilder films. They are perfect. I will say what makes that movie so timeless is that they didn't have it take place in the 50s. I think having it take place in the 20s makes it more timeless. I think if they filmed it in the 50s, it would seem very dated. Again,
part of that is also simply the costuming. I mean, the way they have the little fascinators with some of the feathers and the drop waist kind of 20s kind of ruffled kind of styles.
Yet it still showed off her curves.
But also hid the men better. I think if you were trying to do men in, higher waisted, 50s corset bullet bra, petticoats all around,
but long skirts, you could make it work because you could have them wearing the sweaters with the scarf and the long skirts and stuff like that.
You're coming up with good stuff again, the throwback to the 20s themselves.
I put a lot
the
into
idea
this.
of the seams in the stockings and those kind of, T-strap kind of shoes and the very slinky slip looking kind of drop dresses are again what we kind of think of maybe when we think of femininity, because before World War I, everybody was still very Edwardian. Everything was down at the ankles or the high lace kind of collars, the big hats, everything was still buttoned up. And then the 20s came and women shed all the clothing. It was very scandalous and
didn't have the undergarments. Women were supposed to be very boyish and flat chested. Yet they made it work for Marilyn Monroe, who was neither boyish nor flat chested. And God bless her for it.
Zita, you're laughing.
Yes, I am. Of course.
We should probably get a costume designer on here just to study, the roles of women's costumes in films. Because again, like I said, these 20s costumes that were so feminine are meant to hide the men in drag. But then you've also got Marilyn Monroe busting out of these costumes. So it all works well. And it's kind of funny, Zita, because we did talk about Bus Stop on your 300 Passions podcast and how it didn't deserve to be on the list because it was just a brute force, unhealthy relationship, even though it's one of Marilyn Monroe's better performances. But the idea that Some Like It Hot doesn't count on the 100 Passions list, I feel is kind of sad because I think that there are such charming, healthy little romances in here. Where would you put it on your 100 Passions list if you could, or does it deserve it?
Again, I don't think of it as a romantic movie, first and foremost. And I know that sounds so contradictory because there are romantic subplots, and yet I primarily think of it as a comedy. I feel as though the primary point of the film is the sort of interest in watching these two wayward con men sort of tricking everyone around them and watching them getting caught up in all of these little schemes. And when I think of this film, the first thing I think of is not the scene where Sugarcane kisses Tony Curtis. That's very much secondary for me.
Even her name, Sugarcane. But it's ironic, we've come full circle, because when we did our romantic comedies, classic and contemporary, I'm not the romantic comedy fan, and yet I'm like, no, I love the romance of this. I love the comedy. Oh, everything is so charming, and so I'm like, hot. Amy, are you going to give us now your Billy Wilder top 10 at InSessionFilm.com?
I think I need to. Or the great performances of Billy Wilder that were not nominated for Academy Awards. There's a lot. He really did not win all the awards that he should. I don't care. Yes, he won Best Director twice. I don't care. He should have had like 15 Academy Awards because he is that good and amazing and perfect and wonderful.
So I started out by saying it'd be really difficult to track down his entire filmography, go through his whole body of work. But yet, 9 times out of 10, when you see a Billy Wilder film, wow, it's great. Are there any that you dislike?
I wouldn't say I'd probably say Sabrina. I'm not a fan of that. I'm not saying it's a crappy movie because it's not. However, it's definitely, I don't enjoy watching it. And that says a lot because it has my boyfriend, William Holden, in it at his most charming. It's a sweet movie. I also am not a fan of Humphrey Bogart as a romantic lead. And I'm saying this even in Casablanca. I think the best chemistry in Casablanca was with him and like Louis. Like I wanted to see, and Laszlo, the movie should just be about those three. But I would say out of the ones that I've seen, that's the one that, for as famous and iconic as it is, it just does not do anything for me.
And yet was also remade.
It was also remade, and the remake was nice. But I'm also not a big Harrison Ford fan, so but Harrison Ford is a lot. I feel about Humphrey Bogart the same way that I feel about Harrison Ford, except I'd say Humphrey Bogart in Treasure of the Sierra Madre is one of the greatest performances ever.
Even at his worst, Billy Wilder is still nice. Still fine.
It's still, I mean, it's a beautiful film. The costumes, the charm, again, getting another side of William Holden that we had never seen. When I say that Billy Wilder really knows how to get the best out of his actors, going from Joe Gillis in Sunset Boulevard to Sefton, this total brutal cynic in Stalag 17, and then playing this dashing, sophisticated ladies man about town. That's a lot.
And yet Stalag 17 was not in your top 3.
No, I would say it's like definitely top 10. And it's hard to judge it because I do think it is a great movie, but I don't know how much of it is just because of the almost like personal note on it. Like I saw it on my first date with my ex-husband. We named my son William Holden as a result of that. So it's a personal movie, but I do think it is, again, it's a perfect movie. It's not easily put into a genre. Yes, it's a war film, but it's also a comedy, but it's also like a mystery and like a whodunit. And that's what I like. That's what I like about him so much. I like that The Apartment is very cynical. It is a real slap in the face to corporate America. But it's also really, really funny.
Billy Wilder.
And
just keeps on giving.
He gave us so much, and he asked.
I was going to say, what would you think he would be making today? But I also don't think The Apartment could be made today.
No, because nowadays it's so
Again,
easy
the
to cheat on
tone would
people.
just be so wrong.
With social media. I mean, we're talking the 1960s when people would have to register at a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I mean? And now, but also for people who don't know this, that movie, he was inspired by the movie Brief Encounter to write that movie. And it's because, and he thought about when he watched Brief Encounter, when the couple goes to the friend's apartment to possibly consummate their affair, he thought about someone lives in that apartment. What's his story?
That's awesome.
And that inspired him to write The Apartment. But it is tragic, and it is romantic, and it's also not a perfect romance. It's messy, and you don't know if these two are going to make it. And
all this saucy stuff we're discussing here. Zita, were there other Billy Wilder films on the 100 Passions list?
Yes, there certainly are. A lot of them made it into consideration, even some of the darker ones. And I was sort of surprised, even Love in the Afternoon, which is generally seen as one of his lesser efforts, made it onto the list of nominees. So clearly they were fans.
What are you working on now at your 300 Passions podcast?
So at the moment, I'm working on covering a bevy of 1930s rom-coms. And so we're finally getting around to talking about some of the lesser known ones, Midnight with Claudette Colbert, for example. And so I'm very excited about that. You listening to this podcast have to hear me discuss a sort of range of topics, some of which are not in my wheelhouse. So when we talk about horror, for example, Kristin knows a lot more than I do.
But
and you probably sense that.
I don't like Claudette Colbert. And that's the Midnight that's written by Billy Wilder. See? It all comes full circle. There's so many things like that pop up that you're not even aware that Billy Wilder he's like, I don't want to say he's like Tinkerbell, where he just kind of pops around with his little wand with little pixie dust that just kismet's kind of on a film. But that is at the 300 Passions podcast, where you can follow your podcast. Your main handle is Zita_short on Twitter. Amy Thomasson is at Thomasson11. I'm at Therefore Review. InSessionFilm.com is where you can follow all these things that we have written, because there's actually, again, a lot of Billy Wilder content there. At InSession Film is where you can follow all of the podcast happenings. We usually come out on the weekends in between some of the other big flagship podcasting that they also present on YouTube. We can see each other, the wonders of technology, but our gentle folk getting into some heavy Marvel rankings and Fast and Furious things. They're talking about Fast and Furious, and we're like, oh, some like it hot. So there's Patreon to support In Session Film. There's fancy merchandise here now. You can we've had some comments on Twitter and some messages from everyone. It's so nice to get all kinds of love and likes and reshares and tweets and likes. And now you can wear Women in Session merchandise. That was a really pleasant surprise. Thank you to our illustrious leader, JD Duran, for that. Amy's got her Christmas list all figured out with her Women in Session merchandise.
Everyone is getting it. All of my family members, I love you. You're all going to be decked out in Women in Session.
It has the same energy of that one photograph of Joan Crawford posing in front of a portrait of herself in her household.
Yes! This is why we love her.
All of her family members to wear the Woman in Session t-shirt.
It's gonna be my Christmas card with me and my kids.
I was thinking,
and then we're gonna get my entire extended family, all of us wearing the shirts.
The Big Lebowski with the Time magazine cover mirror, where you're looking at yourself like,
yes.
We feel special. We feel special. So thank you, dear listeners, for listening to us. Thank you, and we'll see you at the next Women in Session.
It's always the right time deal.
Hey, want to go to Mickey D's for lunch?
Ooh, let's go now.
But it's not lunchtime yet.
If we're going to McDonald's, it's always the right time.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that.
There's a deal for every lunch hour at McDonald's.
Now's the time to get 2 for $3.99. Mix and match a 4-piece McNuggets, a McDouble, a McChicken, or a hot and spicy McChicken. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Single item at regular price.